So by now you're probably getting really excited about integral theory. Maybe not. Maybe you need to see more examples. Maybe you should make sure that you watch all the videos that came before this, because I'm building a pretty large argument for this deep level of integration. The learning objectives here, we're just going to review some of the basics of the approach, and then we're going to analyze different elements of reality through this approach. See if it has any value for you. As a reminder, here are the four quadrants: the I, it, we, and its, subjective and objective views of the world, individual and collective. And if you go online and do searches in Google, if that's what you choose, or Firefox, which is my favorite, you'll find that there are many, many versions of this diagram. And my book, if you were to happen to ever read it, has lots of these in here. Now, what's nice about integral theory is it really gives us a way to think about a more fuller sense of reality in an organized way. It gives us a mental map. So over on the right, you see the physical reality is we might be able to actually clone dinosaurs. That's actually pretty cool. The left side actually helps us deal with the ethical values or whether these are good ideas or not, really the why view. So humanities can tell us that why this might be a good idea or not be a good idea. I thought that was pretty funny. So let's just look at four perspectives. And here I picked the monarch butterfly. You could pick anything that you want. And over here in the upper right, you have a very factual understanding of what the monarch butterfly is and what it's happening. Except that you see a word like this. When I see the word scary, I begin to realize that this is not really a completely objective perspective. And the word scary really shouldn't be here because it really depends on your own personal point of view, right? Whether that's scary or not. The fact that there's only 3% left in the world, I find it concerning, maybe not scary. And then in red again, you see some more value judgments, right? So values and values tend to be over here in terms of what we believe, and over here is the things that we can understand as facts. Now, certainly, there's no better system to understand systems than the way the monarch butterfly is born through the cocooning and the metamorphosis. I think it's metamorphosis process. And then over here are some of the cultural values that are associated with monarch butterflies. Here, as the monarch butterfly moves down into Mexico, there are events that occur with their arrival. And certainly I think most people agree that the monarch butterfly might be considered beautiful. How does it look and feel, right? It has a certain kind of aesthetic. However, when you zoom in on a butterfly, maybe not beautiful, maybe beautiful, I don't know. There are other ways to understand the butterfly from a factual point of view. This is a much different way than this of understanding a butterfly, and certainly a much different way than here where we're trying to understand the interaction of the butterfly within a larger ecosystem. And if I just throw a building in here, or interiors, or landscape project into these quadrants, I can begin to think about the same thing. Why do we care about losing the monarch butterfly? Maybe simply because it's beautiful. Probably more so because it signals a disruption in the ecological systems that we know intuitively support us on a daily basis. I can sense beauty at multiple scales, and that's something that I want to get more into as the course goes through. We talked about multi-perspective, multi-temporal, and also we should be looking at multi-scale, which is pretty important. So I can understand the monarch butterfly at a very big scale, the ecology, the ecological system, and the migration patterns of a butterfly. But I can also begin to think very rationally, objectively, how does the monarch butterfly fit into the larger taxonomy of creatures? And here's again where I get nervous about the fact that they're disappearing is why are they disappearing? What have we done to the environment that would make them disappear? We don't eat them. In a sense, the monarch butterfly is a lot like a polar bear in that, yeah, if they disappear, we'll probably be okay, at least globally, probably not locally for a polar bear, but it does concern us. Okay. So now I'm going to be showing you a layout of integral theory and how we might use it to analyze a cell phone and get a better sense of whether that cell phone is sustainable or not. So this is the iPhone, and certainly it has certain dimensions and weight, right? I have to look at the keyboard when I type. I also can't type, so if I mistype, that's my fault. So the iPhone has a certain color, which could be understood as an RGB number, so it could be like whatever that white color is. It has a certain cost, right? And there's a certain profit margin that is connected to that phone. I'm imagining that Apple makes a lot of profit on this phone, and notice that I'm not putting any value judgment on that about whether that's right or wrong that they're making profit. I'm just giving you the facts and nothing but the facts in this quadrant. Now, in this quadrant, the dimensions and weights are explained because they are comfortable. meaning that there's been a lot of research done in the phenomenology, the experience with the object, which is really what industrial designers attack very directly, is does the phone feel good in my hand? Is it working out for me? But also the screen design, right? What does it look like on the screen? So I could be designing software interfaces where the look of the software or the actual object itself, and how those two interrelate is part of the look and feel of this iPhone. I have a feeling that this would rank very high among people in terms of look and feel, and might explain why it is so successful. The question here is not whether it's successful, but whether it's successful and or sustainable from a multi-perspective point of view. So let's see if we can answer this by looking at the how, or the systems of this element. So the operating system is pretty good. In other words, people can use I really can't type, I'm sorry. People can use this phone, they can hit all the buttons, and they can function pretty effectively, in fact, a lot better than they could in the old days. Now, the other thing, though, is the life cycle of the phone, and this is where the sustainability starts to become questionable. So, for example, if I go back up here, I have a materials list of what this thing's made of, and there's something called the Red List in Living Building Challenge, which documents 14 chemicals, compounds that really are considered to be toxic. And so the first thing I look at is the life cycle of obtaining those toxic materials. I wonder if there's some toxicity involved in how this thing is made. I'm also looking at transportation, and I know for a fact that every time I transport millions of these iPhones, I'm generating fossil fuels, which are going into the atmosphere, which then create a climate, a measurable carbon emission, right? So I don't know how to spell emissions, so I'm just going to put it in there and hope that, hey, maybe I'm right. So the process itself emits carbon out into the atmosphere, which might have some sort of larger climate impact into the larger ecosystem. But I can also look at more local ecosystems where the materials are harvested. I wonder, for example, if the local ecosystem is impacted by the harvesting of rare materials. And I wonder also how, for example, the people who are harvesting these materials are treated. In other words, is there an ethical dimension to the iPhone that causes me concern over, I love the iPhone, I love using it, but I wonder who's making it, who's benefiting, and who's not benefiting. So it's an ethical question. I also want to look in the factory, and I want to understand the conditions of the workers in the factory. Is the iPhone so wonderful that it justifies, for example, people working crazy shifts? Now, some people argue that a living wage is made by factory workers that is higher than maybe a living wage that they could make somewhere else. So you could make the argument on both sides that the iPhone factory manufacturing process is sustainable or not sustainable from a social perspective or a cultural perspective, depending on your own worldview, right? If you're an industrial worldview person, you don't really care as much about the workers. But if you're in a sustainable worldview or an integral worldview, you start to think more about, I love these phones, but I really am concerned about the working conditions of those people. So now I start to see, the systems by which this is made have a lot of impacts in carbon emissions and other toxicities released into the atmosphere. I also start to see the social dimension is questionable. And but then I think, wait a minute, the iPhone, I think about social media and how social media has been used to help so many people in different kind of revolutions or different kind of social agendas that are positive. I wonder if I could start to make the case as an iPhone is sustainable from that point of view. I don't know, but you can see from a multi-perspective point of view how complex it is to answer the question about whether something is sustainable or not. In this case, I still own the iPhone. Yes, I have one. It's right here. I feel less good about it. My overall experience with the phone has been diminished because of this little exercise. And now I'm considering buying a different kind of phone from a company that might be more sustainable. Wonder if I could do that. Okay, so here we're going to do a short exercise and looking at a tree instead of an iPhone and try to understand if a tree is sustainable or not, which is kind of a dumb question because we'd have to assume that it is, but I bet you there are some trees that are more sustainable than others, and we can take a look at that. So, for example, the tree, we always start with what we know. We know the age of the tree, we know the height of the tree, we know the color sort of the tree, but there's actually probably millions of shades of a different color, of the green color. But we kind of know the color. We could measure every color of green in the tree. It'd be kind of difficult, right? We can find the location of the tree. We know exactly where it's located. We have the height, we have the location, we have the age, we have the trunk width. So there's all these dimensions and parameters that we can look at in terms of understanding the tree. But the tree, that doesn't tell us really very much, does it? We need to get a fuller, a more holistic perspective of a tree. Now, one of the things I know is I love to sit under a tree because I like the way that light comes through. I like the way the light comes through the leaves. I like the way that I get shade. It makes me feel comfortable. So I'm looking at it from a very human, phenomenological perspective. In other words, boy, I love this tree. Now, what's interesting is this will change based on season, right? So I'm really talking about a tree in the middle of summer. So we could talk about the tree in different, how does the tree change in different seasons or seasonal changes? We can measure that, right? And we can start to think about that. So the tree in the winter is going to have a very different experience than a tree in the summer. Trees are probably most important when thinking about it from a systems point of view. So there are the systems of the tree itself, and I like to think about this in terms of, that's interesting, I like to think of this in terms of different scales. So what are some of the systems? There's something called I don't know if I can spell this, photosynthesis. So the tree is exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen with the environment. So that tree is doing that. The other thing the tree is doing is interacting with the hydrologic cycle. So when it rains, water is transvaporated back into the atmosphere, but it's also finding its way through these branches and down into the ground, which helps with runoff. So all of a sudden, if you place a lot of trees in a landscape, you're going to find that more water is going to find its way down into the earth than simply hitting the ground and running off. So at the immediate proximity, it's also creating a sense of habitat, right? So from a systems point of view, it's creating habitat for other animals. Those animals then leave their remains there, and there's a whole kind of interaction with habitat. And certainly microclimate. From a systems point of view, we can look at how trees and multiple trees and interaction of trees can create different microclimates that can be beneficial to humans. And I told you I couldn't type, right? At the global scale, that exchange of carbon and oxygen is helping to limit, helping us to deal with greenhouse gases, right? So we could have millions more trees, and that's actually going to help our climate change problem. Right now, we've lost many trees, so there's a sense of deforestation. So why do we have deforestation? From a motivational standpoint, we see greed. So we see people that would like to maximize profit, and they don't really care about the impact of trees on the larger system. So they tear them all down, and they create ranging zones for raising cows, and cows leave methane into the environment. Old trees can be very valuable, culturally valuable, depending on the cultures. Some cultures have a great love of nature and some don't. The older the tree is, probably older trees have more value because more people have seen them and experienced them and have come to love them. So the age of a tree is actually relevant into its cultural interpretation. So you've seen the story where we want to build a new building and we have to tear down trees in order to build the building. Some people would object to that. Actually, I would object to that. I worked on a project called the Oaks, which was a senior citizens home, and in order to build the Oaks, we had to tear down all the oak trees that were on the site. So the cultural values in that condition where we thought it was more important to build this building that housed a certain function. Now let me just ask one more question though. If I tear down a tree and make paper, which has some sort of value to society, and I print, for example, I don't know, the Declaration of Independence on that paper, is it worth destroying that tree? If I, on the other hand, take that paper and make a direct mail campaign to create millions of pieces of mail that nobody will read, I feel as though I've wasted the tree. So it's not clear-cut about whether it's sustainable or not to take down a tree. And of course, there are all kinds of systems, and I'm sure you've heard of FSC, which we'll be covering, which is the Forest Stewardship Council. There are all kinds of policies and procedures that can allow us to create a sustainable forest, right? So I think the answer is we're not going to stop cutting down trees, but we're going to begin to think about different ways to do it because of sustainability. So just like I wasn't sure about my cell phone, whether I was going to keep it, I think I want to plant lots of trees. I think I want to take them down again, at least in a very systematic way that has very little impact on the overall environment. So trees, sustainability, integral theory, and that's it for this lecture.